Hi, Emily. How are you doing, girl? Well, I hope you're having a very nice day today. Thank you for clicking on the link. And, I really appreciate this time we get to spend together. I think it's important. I think it is consciousness raising. It is, I think it enhances what we have. And so I'm pleased to do it. Today is the 16th of November. It is already past the midway point of the month of November, and it's 2018, the 18th year of the 21st millennium, the 21st century. And so I figured we'd start our session by going through Mary McKenzie's book, Peaceful Living, and we'll see what material it has for us today to ponder and wonder about. So today's quote is a proverb, and it is, "Silence is one of the most effective forms of communication." I'll read that again. Silence is one of the most effective forms of communication. Let me feel for a moment into that quotation. One thing I know about communication is that 80% of it is nonverbal. And in a way, I think you can describe that as being silence. One thing I'm also aware of is that people really want to express themselves in conversation. And being silent in their presence is a great way to draw them out. And really, I think it helps fulfill them. I think people get a sense of personal fulfillment from expressing themselves to another person. They learn in the process of that expression, and the listener also learns. And so I think listening is really valuable. That is, listening in silence while another person expresses themselves. I think it's one of the most caring gifts that one can bring to another person. And it's something that I try to work on a regular basis. I personally am focused on practicing active listening with my friends and family because I want to cement the bond between us, and listening is a great way to do that. So let's see what Mary McKenzie has to say about this passage. Her part is subtitled Silent Empathy. You may be listening to a friend describe something that is very painful for her. You'd really like to energize, or you'd really like to empathize, but you don't trust your skills. Consider silent empathy. It is exactly the same process as empathy, listening for the feelings and the needs of the other person, except that it's done silently. When you listen for feelings and needs of another, even if silently, you can provide profound healing and connection. Most people will know that you are connecting with them because of your facial expressions and your physical energy. And the thought for the day is silently empathize in at least one conversation today. Well, I think that is great advice. In fact, I personally use a form of silent empathy all the time. Or all the time, on a regular basis, I should say. Not all the time, but on a regular basis when I'm talking to people. One thing that I'll do when I'm having a conversation with a person is, in my mind, sometimes as they're struggling to find words or expressing themselves, I will use my inner voice to try to understand them better. I'll be seeking words that describe their current needs and feelings. And my interest is in getting the most accurate understanding of what they're trying to convey. Another thing that I'll do in my mind is that I'll repeat key phrases. I'll repeat key words so that I can remember them and keep them in mind when I respond to them. So there might be a list of ideas that they're describing, and I'll do my best to sort of retain that information in my mind using my inner voice, performing some inner rehearsal, some internal rehearsal. And then I'll use that internal rehearsal to summarize what they've said so that my partner gets a sense that I've really paid attention and tried to understand what they have to say. Another thing that I do when I talk to another person is quite often I'll use how should I say? I want to say aphorisms, but that's not quite the word I'm looking for. I will make statements about what I want to be feeling. Like in my own mind, I'll make statements of care and consideration. And I'll repeat these statements of care and consideration. Maybe I'll say things like, I appreciate you, in my mind. And the hope of saying that is to sort of motivate me. It gives me a motive for understanding them in a more deep way. Sometimes it helps me care for another person more deeply. And also, I hope that it helps me convey the non-verbally more clearly. Even though I don't necessarily control my nonverbal responses, I don't think anyone really can. I mean, some people can control them very well. Actors and actresses do a really good job. I have a concern about that being contrived. So, I do my best to let those nonverbal responses occur naturally. And part of the way I do that is by repeating phrases in my mind about care and consideration for the other person. And that's how I do it. So it's kind of interesting how, I use my inner voice to engage in conversation with people. I mean, I just talked about at least 3 ways how I use my inner voice, like the internal rehearsal. I called it describing aphorisms, but it's more like describing my motivation for getting to know them. And then what was the other one? Oh yeah, it's just trying to to sort of understand accurate empathy, to sort of understand the other person's world as accurately as possible. And, I do these things on a continual basis when I speak with other people. It's part of how I respect them. It's part of how I respect what they have to say. It's part of how I acknowledge what they have to say. It's also part of my performance in terms of my part of the conversation. I want to convey a care, I want to convey an attentiveness to what they have to say. And that's exactly how I do it. And I've just been doing that over the years, and I've gained a certain amount of facility doing it. And I think that in many ways it is silent empathy. I know that Mary McKenzie really didn't go into it in as great a detail as I did. The detail that she went, I mean, when someone says, "Oh, just listen to them," what do they mean? When someone asks you to listen to them, What are they really asking for you to do? Is it to just hear their words? Or are they asking for something deeper than that? And so I've boiled listening down to those three tasks. And that's how I perform active listening. There's another aspect to active listening too, at least it is for me, and that is I have to actively constrain my interest in butting in. There's something about me, and I'm sure maybe a lot of people have it, but I have a strong desire to speak up and respond almost immediately to everything that they say. It is a desire that is just so deeply ingrained in me that sometimes it takes all my energy to restrain myself, to constrain myself, and prevent me from speaking up when another person is trying to talk. And many times have I tried to restrain myself and failed. And I try to say something, and then I recognize that that I'm tripping them up. They've lost their train of thought now. And so they are trying to recover, and then I pull back in silence while I watch them recover. And I've pretty much made them stumble in front of me. And that's something that I regret. Occasionally I speak up because I just can't help myself. One of the things about being an active listener and paying attention is that what they're saying becomes important to you. And if something's important to you, then, at least for me, I want to respond to it. So there's this dichotomy where I'm building the meaning that they are conveying to me, and I'm withholding my response, my verbal responses, my physical, sometimes even my visceral responses, and I'm sort of withholding them so that I can give the other person freedom to express themselves. So it's kind of interesting how active listening involves a certain amount of restraint. At least for me it does. Because as I value what another person says, as I'm creating value, and in my mind I'm building value, I'm building meaning, things are making sense, I'm pulling it together. It's exciting for me, it's energizing for me, and I want to blurt out what I think I know, I just want to blurt out in just this beautiful commonality, like this mutuality. I want to share, look, I'm with you. I'm in your world right now. Check this out. Check me out, how well I'm doing. Admire me. And it's funny how that happens. And quite often, now of course, when I restrain myself, I can only restrain myself for 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then I've got to say something. Because I've built up all of this relating energy, right? And it's quite often passionate, Maybe they're talking about something that I can really relate to, or at least I've decided to relate to, and because of that, I'm like, oh man, this is important to me too. And so, anyway, that's made for some really great rapport with other people. It's made for some really great conversations with other people. And, it enhances my enjoyment when I'm with others. And it also helps me learn and grow and develop and gain new perspectives. And it's wonderful. It's part of the reason I like being around people so much. Yeah, I think I have some pretty good social skills I'm certainly not a master, but I've been practicing long enough to sort of figure out what's going on. Anyway, enough of that. Thank you, Mary Mackenzie, for your topic of silent empathy. So, Thanksgiving is just around the corner. And so is Christmas, by the way. And so one of the things I've been doing is sharing with you passages from a book called Hark, a Christmas Sampler that I picked up from the Allen Hancock College Library. And in this sampler, there is a poem. And I thought that I would read some poetry for us. And maybe afterwards we can respond to the poem, and maybe I'll tell you a little bit about what it means to me. So here we go. Here's the poem. It's on 2 pages, and I'm going to read it right now. And the title of the poem is called Singing Carols. The night is crisp and very cold, and moonshine lights our way as we go house to house and sing about that special day. And Heidi's voice comes straining through the scarf that Mama knit, and Adam's boots are much too big and only sort of fit. And Jason's lost a mitten back by Mrs. Rankin's walk. So with his fingers in his mouth, he finds it hard to talk. Then Heidi's voice goes very loud, and Adam's voice is low. And Jason never hits a note that any of us know. But at each house we sing some songs, like Deck the Halls and such. The neighbors smile and call our names. Perhaps that isn't much. But it was not so different when 2,000 years ago, the angels singing brought big smiles to shepherds in the snow. Pretty neat, huh? What a neat poem, Singing Carols. Well, I really like this illustration. This illustration is beautiful. It shows the nighttime, and I wonder if it shows a moon. It does. See, there's the moon showing, sunlight gleaming on the snow. And look at the house there. You know, in my mind, the scene is very romantic. What makes it romantic is the beauty of the moon shining down on the snow. And also the imperfection, the relative imperfection. You know, there's these singers, they're struggling too. They're wearing boots that don't fit. They lost their mittens. They've got their hands in their mouth because their hands are cold. And their voices, well, they're doing the best they can. Some sing really loud. Others sing notes that none of us know. You know, these are people. These are people who are fallible, and they're doing their best to bring joy to others through their song. And they're walking from house to house, just giving their gift and being welcomed, being invited by their neighbors to sing carols out in the street. And all of this to honor what happened 2,000 years ago when the angels brought big smiles to shepherds in the snow. So I was really touched by that poem. And I love this idea of, going from house to door, singing Christmas carols. It's a gift, right? It's a gift that the singers are giving to the listeners. You know, and there's enjoyment all around. The singers enjoy their singing, and the listeners enjoy what they hear. And there's this community, right? There's this camaraderie between the singers, and there's this community that's being built between the singers and the listeners in their homes. And there's this romantic setting, a night with stars, and it's cold, and people are wearing scarves and mittens and jackets, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So whoever wrote that poem, I'm grateful to them for having written it. It's gorgeous. I can feel the romanticism here in my heart. Thank you very much for that wonderful poem. So I figured that we'll go into what is on my mind lately regarding questions. I'm reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, by the way. I think I may have mentioned that. I haven't finished the ebook. I did finish reading the audiobook. Oh, and by the way, yesterday I started reading the Twilight series. I started with book 1. Yeah, I know. So what is it about? It's about vampires, right? It's about vampires and werewolves in this town in what state is it? Washington, called Forks. And I was a little skeptical when I started reading the audiobook. But I thought that if I could get into Twilight the way I've gotten into Harry Potter, that would be neat. I like this idea of getting into series that are fantasy and science fiction. I'm starting to get into that now. Let me tell you how I grew up. I grew up basically reading only nonfiction books, and I love nonfiction books. 98% of my enjoyment from reading comes from reading nonfiction books. But there's that 2% that's growing little by little, right, of reading fiction books. Mainly, it's essentially like fantasy, like Harry Potter and maybe Twilight. And this is what I'm appreciating about these books. Is it they have an ability to sort of help me get into an emotional feeling, an attitude about a certain place and a certain time. And I find that magnetic. I find it energizing and interesting. It's like it's a feeling. There's this Harry Potter feeling. How would I describe it? When I read Harry Potter or listen to Harry Potter, I think for me it's about possibilities. It's about imagination. It's about wonder, right? It's these, and there are feelings associated with wonder and possibility and creativity. There's a feeling behind that, at least in the world of Harry Potter. And I mentioned a second ago that it's magnetic. It is magnetic because it's just like, it's appealing. It's satisfying. There's something about it. And it goes beyond the story. It goes beyond the music. It goes beyond the movies. It's sort of like this feeling that it generates in me. It's like an internal feeling. It almost has nothing to do with the book. It has to do with sort of the feelings that are instilled in me, that are stirred up in my mind about the story, and it's just me wanting to enjoy those feelings again. Yeah. So let's get back. So I'm reading the Twilight series, and I'm also continuing to read the Harry Potter series. I want to find a way to read the next book in the Harry Potter series. I've just read the first one, but I'd like to get into the second book. Let me be frank about the Twilight series so far. I've spent about 2 hours in the audiobook so far, in the Twilight audiobook, and it's not as interesting so far as Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling's got a pace in which she writes her book, and it's rapid and things happen, and I really appreciate J.K. Rowling's writing style. I don't seem to recall who the writer was for Twilight, but I think it's a little slow for me right now. So far, I mean, I've spent 2 hours in it, and there are no vampires. But I guess I think that's what was happening, is that the writer is setting the stage. Yeah, the writer is basically in the writing, I'm asking myself, okay, who's the vampire, and what are vampires like, and how do they act and react to normal people? And so maybe I think that's what the author is trying to do. It's just trying to convey just this general sense of mystery and maybe even darkness, right? And so I just need to I need to figure out what emotions it's stirring up in me. I haven't quite figured that out yet. All right, so let's answer a few questions so that you can get to know me a little better. And, well, question number 319, do you know karate? I think I have. Do I know karate? No, I don't. I don't know karate. I don't know any martial arts. Question number 320, do you have a real life hero? When I think about it, yeah, I've got a couple of them. Albert Einstein, and maybe Albert Ellis, and maybe Ayn Rand. Less so Ayn Rand these days. I think more so Einstein, and definitely more so Albert Ellis. And there's another hero of mine that I've been contemplating. The name is not coming to mind. It'll come to mind in the future. So question number 321, have you ever owned a bike? Oh yeah, I have owned a bike. I'm wondering if I'm going over these questions again. Yeah, I had a Diamondback bicycle. It was a silver and metallic BMX bike when I was a kid, like 10, 11, 12 years old. Love that bike. I still love that bike. I also had another bike. I had a Huffy, which was a black bike, which is pretty sturdy bike. And it was mostly broke, and I kind of used it to fly off of hills, fly down hills and stuff like that. And I use it as my, I don't know, sort of like my tough bike, so to speak. I'd take that bike, say, into the streams and into the mud and into the snow. I'd break it up. My other bike, my diamond bike, was my nice bike. And so I would drive that on the street and through town. And I'd take good care of it, grease the chains, things like that. Although I wouldn't use grease. If I recall, I used WD-40 to grease the chains. But yeah, I tell you, when I was younger, I loved my bike. In fact, interestingly enough, today I ride a bike. And, it might be a good idea. Now, when I say I ride a bike, I mean I ride a stationary bike. It might be a good idea for me to actually buy a bike. I've been thinking about that lately. Now, I probably want to buy a mountain bike. I've been thinking about how I'm going to sort of fix that mountain bike in my car. Am I going to put it on the roof? Am I going to store the mountain bike on the roof? Am I going to store the mountain bike in the rear of my car using the hitch, right? Or am I going to just put my bike in the back of my minivan? I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to store it. And where am I going to put the bike in my apartment? That's actually just as pertinent a question. I don't know where I'm going to put it. I might just put it near my bed or something like that, or put it in my living room. Where am I going to put the bike? So I'm talking about buying stuff like buying a Christmas tree and then buying a bike. But even before I consider buying those things, I need to figure out where I'm going to put them. You see, I don't know. I live in a small space. I don't have a lot of places to store stuff. And, figuring out where to put a bike, I think I need to make that decision, that choice first. And once I figure that out, then I'll go ahead and buy a bike. Okay, next question. Question number 322. Is there a trend or fashion you wish would come back? A trend or fashion I wish which would come back. There is one trend and fashion that I hope will occur in the future, and that is more variation in the styling of men's clothing. And I've been getting my wish. Almost every day I go shopping, I notice new ways that men are expressing themselves fashionably. And I'm so pleased. Emily, you have no idea how monochromatic men's fashion was 20 years ago. Oh my gosh. And even just 10 years ago, men's fashion was dead as a doorknob. It was just so dull. At least for the common man. Only recently, I'd guess within the last 10 years or so, has male fashion really taken off. We've gotten all kinds of clothes now for men to wear, and I'm so pleased. One example is colorful jeans. I see men, even at work, wearing red tinted pants, green tinted pants. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. Let me tell you, this is brand new. Not only that, but I'm also noticing in men's fashion, men's long sleeve and short sleeve shirts, prints that are more floral in design. And I'm really appreciating that trend. Because 10 years ago, no flowers. Flowers are beautiful. Also, this is how it started out back in the 90s. Men were somehow en masse willing to wear pink shirts. Now this was standout different from fashion in just prior to that. And I think it came out, I don't know, I seem to remember country music stars sporting pink shirts. And it became a big thing. And I'm so pleased that we've gone beyond that because, pink itself, at least I'd like to get beyond the pink. In fact, a lot of men were calling the color salmon in order to masculinize the color. It's so funny how we're all locked into these gender roles. And thankfully, we're getting a little bit more freedom, being able to dress outside the gender roles a little bit, because they were really strict 10, 20 years ago, super strict. And in fact, I can only imagine just how strict they were even prior to that, like in the 1950s and the 1930s. This commitment to focus on gender as sort of dictating how people dress was really powerful. And only now is it beginning to loosen its grip. And I'm so happy for the next generation. Sadly, my generation. Oh boy, I had to suffer through a lot of monochromatic clothing. In fact, even today, look at what I'm wearing today, just a blue long sleeve shirt, which I've been wearing for almost 30 years of my adult working life. You know, it would be nice to get out of this uniform and wear something a little more creative and fashionable. And it's possible today. But here's the thing, I've been wearing this kind of shirt for 30 years. So it's like, okay, am I going to change or not? And the fact is, now I feel more comfortable. I just feel more comfortable in the monochromatic stuff. I change stuff up a little bit here and there, but it's very subtle. And anyway, I'm really pleased to see that men's fashion is becoming just a little bit more interesting. And I'm seeing all kinds of new changes. Like there's even brand new clothing coming out, like joggers, brand new. 5 years ago, there was no such thing as joggers. I'm totally serious. Now I think I've got maybe 2 pairs of joggers. Thing is, I don't wear them very often. Let's see, what else? Men's fashion, and I guess I won't bore you with the details. As a woman, as a young woman, you've got so many fashion choices that you can make, and I know it's a little tougher when you're in high school because there's a lot of like peer pressure, right? And it's not so much peer pressure, but it's like this homogeneity of fashion in your age group. And but at least you know that you've got the freedom to break out of it if you want. And I'm so pleased. I didn't necessarily have that choice. I mean, I could have broken out of it, but it would have been a real social challenge for me to and who needs more social challenges? Let me tell you, the social environment is fraught with challenge all by itself without having to change norms as it relates to fashion, or to deal with that. So anyway, I'm just so pleased about the status of men's fashion today, and I have high hopes about the future. I have high hopes that eventually men will be able to wear clothing that's more functional, clothing that's more fashionable, clothing that's more expressive, and just enjoy dressing in the morning a little bit more than I do right now. I mean, I'm enjoying dressing now. In fact, the changes that have occurred in the workplace just over the last 5 years have been stunning. Stunning. There's a lot more informality. If you would have looked at me, say, 10 years ago, I would be wearing a tie just prior to going to work. Guess what? No tie today. What do you know about that? Now, I'm pleased to wear a tie every once in a while, and because I wore them for so many years. But no tie today. Wow, what do you know about that? So I like these, the loosening of the constraints a little bit in terms of male fashion at the workplace. And even just around town, casual fashion, men's fashion has really been exploding by leaps and bounds. One thing I'm noticing too about men's fashion is that in order to sort of savor the spectrum of fashion that's available out there for men, it costs some money. I know. These changes are not necessarily inexpensive. I mean, I'm glad to have them, but I haven't really been able to throw down the cash and buy some chukka boots. I just haven't done that yet. Or throw down the cash and buy some, even buy some, some, I don't know, some other kinds of shoes. There's so many, like, what is that kind of, something strap? Monk strap shoes. I haven't gone so far as to purchase a pair. Anyway, so to answer the question specifically, it's not any particular fashion trend like from the 60s or 70s or 80s or 90s. For me, it's just about the variation. I'm loving to see the variation in men's fashion these days, and I'm really optimistic about what the future might bring. I'm hoping that it'll provide a lot more comfort, certainly. Okay, next question. Question number 323. If you could inherit any animal-like feature, what would it be? Boy, inherit an animal-like feature. Inherit an animal-like feature. Well, the first thing I thought of is I'd love to inherit the ability to fly, right? Fly like a bird. I also like the ability of amazing athleticism from say the cheetahs or the kangaroos. Amazing athleticism that some animals have. Like I'm thinking about monkeys and their ability to swing through the trees. You know, I think I'd love to have that kind of strength. In fact, strength, yeah, muscles from, say, rhinos and hippopotamuses and elephants. That would be amazing to have that strength. So strength, power, agility, and even and flight. Those are traits that I'd like to have from animals. Next question. Are you a fan of the ocean? Well, I live 10 miles from the ocean, so yeah, I'm a fan of it. Now, that's not to say that there are not people out there who are more fans of the ocean than I am. Here's the thing. I'm a fan of the ocean, but there are limits to my fandom. And it essentially revolves around the risk of the ocean. I recognize the aquatic environment as a new environment that's actually not, that marine environment is really not home for me. It's really home for sea lions and whales and sharks and jellyfish and sea urchins and sea cucumbers and starfish. It's their home. And at least that's how I see it. And so here's another thing about the ocean. There's a lot of energy in that ocean. It's an energy that is very overpowering, right? It's energy that can break me in half if it chooses at any random time. So, I have a great deal of respect for the ocean. So there's an acknowledgement that it's not my home. It's respect for its power. And I mean, I love the ocean, but I don't necessarily indulge like Aquaman or a purely ocean-going person. I don't necessarily happen to have a kayak or a stand-up paddleboard, and so I'm not necessarily playing, or even a surfboard, and I'm not necessarily playing in the ocean waters all the time. But you know what? Maybe that'll change. I know that there are a lot of people out there who spend a lot of time surfing in the ocean and playing in the ocean, and I get it. The ocean is an enjoyable place to be. And in fact, last autumn, which was just like last month, I was enjoying time in the ocean. I was swimming in the ocean with friends, and it wasn't that cold. It was feeling pretty warm at the time, and I loved my experience in the ocean. It was wonderful. But it is also at the same time a little disconcerting. You can't see around you. The water and the waters change their height and the temperature, and it's, I think I might feel a little uneasy in there because I think I recognize some risk in that it's not necessarily my home environment. But I do love the ocean. Next question. Question number 325. Have you been scuba diving before? And the answer is no. I've never been scuba diving. Now, I have had a snorkel that I've placed in my mouth, and also goggles that I've used, face mask style goggles. And, I do enjoy looking underwater. Like I remember visiting Hawaii, and really enjoying looking under the water. And it really is quite beautiful. The waters of Hawaii are just stunning. Now, the waters off of California, there's nothing to see. I've put goggles on and looked around, and there's so much turbidity in the water that you really just can't see your hands in front of your face. So you're not seeing anything unless, say, I guess you're going deeper. I pretty much stay near the shore anyway, so that's probably why. The waves sort of rustling the grains of sand and pushing them into they'd end up diffusing in the water. Okay, next question. Question number 326. Have you ever had a really bad job interview? Well, not for any job that mattered to me. If a job matters to me, then I will rehearse the job interview in some way. So, no, I've never really had a bad interview, and that's mainly because I've tried really hard to for jobs that matter to me. I do a good job preparing. So the answer is no. Question number 327. Have you ever gotten fired from a job? Well, let me think. There was one time, and it wasn't even a real job. It was a work study program, and I was working for the library, and I think I might have been talking too much in the library. I was working and assisting as an assistant to the research librarian. And I was just talking a little bit too much. Let me tell you, here's the thing about working in a library. It gets a little dull. Imagine sitting in a library at a desk, waiting for a person to ask you a technical question about where to find information in the library. It might be hours and maybe even days before you get someone at your counter asking a question. And so the question is, how do you spend your time at the library? What is it that you do while you're sitting at your desk within the stacks of books? I'm sure you talk to people. You talk to people, certainly, coworkers perhaps, and maybe you read a book or do some administrative work. Let me tell you, I was struggling during that time, and I basically had a friend there. I think they were my assistant or something, and I was talking to them. But I think my supervisor at the time thought I was talking a little bit too much and let me go. Now, it wasn't a real job. It was a work study position, so I ended up continuing to work for the library, just in a different position. So, I worked for the library in a work study capacity for years. And I'm talking about Zimmerman College Library at the University of New Mexico. Yeah. Now, there was another job that I was let go of, and it was for very good reason. All the jobs that I've lost for very good reasons. And just I acknowledge them to be true. One was, I think it was a job that was a part-time job. It wasn't a part-time, it was a temporary job. I used to get a lot of temporary jobs, particularly when I lived in Seattle. That's pretty much how I made my way monetarily. No, I was hired on at Walden Books for a while. But I had a lot of temporary jobs to keep my head above water financially. And so there was one temporary job where I worked at a hospital. And my job was very simple. It was ensuring that people's wristbands were put on their wrists and that people received paperwork and forms that they needed to fill out in order to be admitted or to be seen at the hospital. So this is for pretty routine work, and the work involved printing out wristbands from a database, a computerized database, and then going out to people who are sitting in the lobby and handing them a packet of forms and their wristband. Okay? Pretty straightforward job, not complicated. And you might be asking yourself, well, Miguel, how did you get let go from that job? Well, the answer is very easy. I had pneumonia at the time. I literally had pneumonia. I was so sick. And I was trying to hide my cough because I needed the money. But then there was like this ethical thing that was coming up. Like, here I am working around sick people with pneumonia. Now, thankfully, pneumonia is not catching. So, but still, I was in a world of hurt, and thankfully they let me go from that job because I wouldn't have quit. I just had that much grit. But I was struggling. I was struggling in more ways than one at that job. I really needed to get health care, but at the time, guess what? I didn't have health insurance. I did not have health insurance. So here I am, poor, basically, working a temp job in a hospital with pneumonia without a means to get well. Thankfully, the job was easy and I didn't have to stand up that much because I had pneumonia. And I guess what happened is one of the nurses or whatever said, this guy is sick. Get him out of here. That was a smart decision. And so I lost my job. No regrets there. Let me tell you, I was sick. And so I went home and basically spent all day for many days in bed, basically trying to recover from pneumonia, which I never really did. I did end up dragging myself out of bed, really just dragging myself out of bed, dragging myself up to the doctor's office and getting some antibiotics. I got a Z-Pack, a free Z-Pack, thank God. and survived. I basically lived. Thank God. That was a brush with death. I was just so weak, so vulnerable. If I didn't get that Z-Pack, I would have been dead. I had no health insurance. I had no money. I had no health insurance and no money, and I was sick. If that is something that could happen to me, that is something that could happen to anybody. And it's actually part of the reason that I'm in favor of social safety nets and bolstering them for all people, because I think we all find ourselves in vulnerable positions. And thankfully, through the generosity of a doctor and through just sheer force of will, I was able to keep myself alive at a time when I had no health insurance, no money. Yeah. As you can tell, I'm sort of reminiscing about that, and I'm reminding myself that was a really hard time. And there's another aspect of the story too, and that is I had trouble asking for help. I recognize that as a personal failing and one that essentially risked my life. But I do have trouble asking for help. I wonder if you're the same way, Emily. Emily, do you have... I have a sense, and this is just my take about you and your personality, Emily, is that I think you have a hard time identifying what it is that you want and expressing it. Hey, you know what? I have the same problem. I struggle with the same issue. I have a hard time figuring out what it is that I want, and asking for it when I do. There's just so much uncertainty in the world. Well, thankfully, as I've grown up, as I've grown older, it's become easier to identify. Only when you've got experience behind you, under your belt, do you begin to recognize certain needs that you have and then express them because you have knowledge about how to satisfy them. And often satisfying them before you can, you need to express that need to someone. And so I understand the plight you're in, Emily, because I've been there. It's tough when you're a kid and you're uncertain about even what your own needs might be, because maybe your parents or relatives might dismiss your needs. Friends might dismiss them thoughtlessly. And so, you learn from that experience. And, so long as we can continue to live, so long as we can continue to stay alive, we necessarily become better at meeting our needs. Not just meeting them, but also acknowledging them, identifying them, and expressing them. And that just comes with time. It comes with age. And eventually it does get easier. So that's an optimistic, I think, empowering message that I can give to you today, Emily, about not knowing what you want. In a lot of respects, people just in general don't know what they want, especially today, when pretty much everything is handed to people on a silver platter. This wasn't necessarily the case 100 years ago, where people struggled to eke out their own living. And I think it was probably more clear about what people wanted and needed back then, 100 years ago, when they had needs that were glaring them in the face, like the need to obtain a meal for the day, or 3 meals for the day, or the need to obtain clothing for the weather. Those needs are apparent, they're known, other people can see them readily. Today, we don't have problems so much with clothing and food. We have existential needs, right? And it's a lot more unclear about what needs we have, and it's even less clear about how we can communicate those needs and how other people might even help us at all to satisfy them. So it's just part of the human condition, and I'm right there with you, Em. You and I have that in common, So anyway, with that little bit of empathy and compassion, I think I'm going to wrap up this video. Emily, I just want to state again how much I appreciate your time and your consideration. Thank you for the care that you've given me over the years. And thank you for allowing me to serve you in the ways that I've been able to. Probably in ways that you think are minor, but to me are important. Thank you for being someone who's significant in my life, and someone who, brings meaning to it. Someone who is willing to accept love and care and kindness. And I really appreciate that outlet for me. And I hope you have a wonderful day today. And I hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving. Maybe we'll see each other on the Turkey Trot Run this coming Sunday. I know I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to hit the trail and get those 3 miles under my belt. And in fact, that reminds me, I've got to do some laundry. So I got to put all of my running clothes in through the laundry because they're a little dirty right now, and I've got to clean them up for the big race. So looking forward to seeing you there if you choose to be there. And again, I hope you have a wonderful day. Peace and love.